Here we go. So this epic, to repeat, is the next work that we are going to work on for next about month, and it's got two types of work in it. One type of work is Sheka's great recommendation to start porting features that already exist in the desktop version, port them into the shared version that will work in both WebIDE and desktop, that will kind of figure out what are the inefficiencies that we are facing with development. Because maybe some of the issues that we think that are issues now won't be issues at all. Like, I don't know, mediator commands. Maybe we have all the ones that we need, or it's super easy to add another one and it's not we find out that that's
Yeah.
not an issue for development at all. Or we will find out that that takes the most amount of time. So the feature that I decided that we should port is the CI/CD integration. Namely, I would imagine that we will start by porting this
Yeah,
status bar.
pipeline passed bit, right?
Say that again. Yeah, pipeline passed. Exactly. Pipeline passed, a merge request and issue that are, where's the issue? Pipeline, MR, issues not there. But like if there was an issue open for this branch, which it's main branch, so it isn't, that would be there too. And the first part of that is the current branch refresher. What sucks about it is that it's a backend work, like it's not you like it's the main class in the workflow that gets all the information for a current branch, like what's the pipeline, what's the merge request, but it's not necessarily visible to users. So I don't know if we can, like, I would be open to find out whether we can take some more um, like a vertical slice through the feature, if I'm saying it correctly, like reduce, like make it work all the way to UI, not just this plumbing. But I didn't come up with a way how to, for example, what I mean by vertical slice, we would not do the whole refresh that contains pipeline, merge request, and issue, but we would focus on pipeline, for example, and create the one issue would be create the refresher for it and all the way to the status bar item. So when the issue
I
is
like
done,
that. I like that better. Like I
uh,
like that better because then you have a full slice of work
yeah,
that you're delivering.
I,
Um,
I'd be really keen on doing that if somebody can find a way how to do it. I was staring into the code yesterday and they are quite intertwined. All these, like you get the pipeline based on the merge request, for example. So maybe merge request would be different because sometimes you have
oh,
a pipeline
I
for,
see what you mean. Yeah,
sometimes you
because
have a pipeline for a branch, but sometimes you have a merge request pipeline. And so those are two different things.
so then now you have to check, now you have to port web merge requests and see how that would work, right? So it's quite, yeah,
So
it's
maybe merge request would be the best way to start. But then, this is like a class that has 250, 300 lines of production code. And I was thinking if we start slicing it, is the slice going to be beneficial in terms of efficiency compared to doing the whole lot at once? And like, I don't know. I think that programmers always tend to think it's better to do the whole thing at once rather than slice it up. And in the end, it always turns up to be
yeah, to
better
slice it up.
sliced. So
Yeah.
I'd be
I,
open to do it with slicing.
so current branch refresher, we have to port the whole class. Is that correct to make this work?
Or we need to separate, like we need to take out parts of the logic or duplicate them, like copy paste parts of the logic and move them into the shared. You know what we could do?
Mhm.
We could take. I'm doing just very dumb, like a high level view, but the refresher is now doing like this many features. Um, and we would then create like a shared refresher. We would copy paste this code and somehow polish it. That's, for example, to get merge requests, right, for the current branch. That would duplicate this logic because I think that extracting it would be too difficult, but maybe it isn't. That would be up to the engineer who's picking it up. Then we would build the UI for this as well, I guess, because the status bar again, there is like this is refresher, and then there is a similar thing with a status bar that also is one class that is concerned with all three of the
All
status
status
bar
by
fields.
items. Yeah. So
And
maybe
so,
that we
yeah,
can slice easily, right? I'm guessing we can say one goes to our new method and the other to, like, we could slice it that way, right?
I think we could. I think we could. And so we could then with the refresher that's quite intertwined, we could take out the part of logic, keep the original there, write tests for it, take the MR status bar item. That one we could, as Shekhar says, we could probably just take it and reference it here. And this would be the first vertical slice that we will
Yeah.
release. And so ignore what I said here, probably about doing horizontal slicing and first porting the plumbing and then the UI. But there are still parts of this that are going to be relevant, which is that
The get
we need
with the
current
method.
branch. That's the
Yeah.
most important thing. And then there is many API calls that happen there, and they are all using the old method on GitLab service instead of defining the request
Yeah.
shape. So
The second part is easier, but the first part, like, again, I'm not sure how does the Git abstraction work on the web IDE for, like, is it?
yeah, so there is this ref in the big config that, for example, the config that now contains code suggestions enabled, or yeah, I think it's called code suggestions enabled. That config also contains ref, and it
Oh, I
contains
see.
MR. And I think that when when you open WebID on a merge request, it doesn't contain the ref at all, and it just contains merge request
I see.
reference. And so our abstraction in the WebID, the platform, if we have a
Browser
method
abstraction.
get the browser implementation of the platform. If the platform has a method get branch, we would have to here implement if there is a ref in a config,
Yeah.
use the ref. If there isn't ref, use
Then
the make
get the
API
MR,
request for the MR and get the branch from the MR
the ref. Yeah.
response. And there is another tricky part, but that's kind of not that important. The desktop extension supports tags and shows you like pipeline for tags, for example. Whilst the WebID has an existing bug, it doesn't support, or maybe not bug, but like it's something that's been outscoped. And
Yeah.
if you open WebID on a tag, it just completely fails and doesn't load. That's existing known problem. So that would be the first feature. I think that it kind of gives the full spectrum of you have to change the maybe even mediator command, maybe just the browser
Ref.
platform and a little bit of UI and whatnot. So that was my idea of the
That
feature
sounds good.
slice.
That
And
sounds good.
then there is work like inefficiencies in the development that I know that exist and like we don't need to discover them or verify them. And that would be including workflow to WebID in a production ready way, something that Stanislav wants to work on because he has an idea about how to make a web workflow into NPM module.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah.
if I open this, this is like we there are issues with submodules. One is that we don't run the full workflow CI on WebIDE. We only run the task that bundles the browser.js entry point. And so if we were referencing version where tests are failing or there is some other issues, we wouldn't know about it. Another issue is that the submodule can reference any ref. It can be temporary feature branch on the
Correct.
a
On
workflow
workflow
that
project.
can be deleted. And so we need to figure out what are all the issues with submodules and how to remove them. I was just brainstorming here and thinking like we can reuse the approach from VS Code build. That approach actually that's used for our VS Code fork. We have
I
a
see.
build task for VS Code fork that bundles the whole like a vanilla VS Code, or it has a few tweaks to the code, but not many. And then that's a tar archive that's moved into the WebIDE project, and the makefile is then unarchiving it and whatnot. So that's one approach that
That's archive, but we will be pushing to an npm artifact repo, right?
possibly that's if Stanislav goes with that, but otherwise it was like
Yeah,
the
similar. It's a similar approach, right?
yeah, it is similar, but the VS Code build doesn't use npm archive. It just stores the archive in our like pipeline artifacts.
Yeah.
Another option would be to move the whole thing in WebIDE. Another, like, and by whole thing I mean take the whole workflow extension and just move it to WebIDE, because they are so, it's both VS Code projects. They are quite related. They share some types. Might make sense. Another one would be creating CI tasks that just verify that this is like that mitigated these issues and more if we have any. Like you could have a CI verification task that checks that the ref has a passing test on the workflow project, and that the ref
I see.
belongs to a tag, for example, or that it belongs to at least the main branch, whatever we would decide.
Yeah, so that's if we go with submodules, we can do that
Yeah,
check, right?
yeah,
In fact, we could also probably check whether the ref belongs to the main branch, and then
exactly. We definitely could. And so I would imagine that whatever we will do here is gonna improve these issues without significantly uh, impacting
changing.
the developer productivity that we now have with the submodule, which is super sweet in my opinion. People might hate submodules, but it's a folder where I can tweak something and I can instantly test it when I run the yarn start example one
Exactly.
folder above. So I would expect that the
And
developer
I
experiences,
can push to the repo as well. It's like
yeah,
very
push to
simple.
both workflow and
Yeah,
WebIDE from the same repo.
exactly.
So um, I and yeah, and it just like you have a merge request in WebIDE, you check it out, and you have both of the projects that you can fiddle
Yeah.
with.
I
So
mean, in if we do an npm module, for example, or a archive, like we'll have to figure out a way on how do you refer to the archive locally,
yeah,
right? When you're doing
yeah,
local dev.
like the
So
npm link or whatever the name
yeah,
is. It
exactly.
never, like, I'm not like a capacity on these things, but it never worked for me the way I would like it to.
Well, I think Paul has got like because there's same problems for the VS Code build project, right? So I think Paul's got some instructions in there, if I remember correctly.
I'll link them in here.
Oh
Set
yeah.
up integrating
Local
with local
yarn local
repo.
setup. That's the one
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which fixes it. Yeah,
So we would have to have something that I can write one command, two commands, and I can
and
locally
copies.
develop both. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one thing that I know we need to do, because the submodule is just not something that should live in this current shape, something that should live there for too long. It's just asking for some misconfiguration.
Yep.
Then we've got setup debugging in WebIDE. Now we don't support source maps at all. So what we are fully dependent on console logs and logs, and the what's it saying? Like the feedback cycle is pretty much like the restart the whole make task for creating example and try it again and clear your
But the
cache ideally.
aren't we generating the map.js file
But it's
or
not getting loaded if I'm not mistaken.
okay.
It's not getting loaded by the developer tools. I don't know what trickery has to happen in the VS Code platform to support it. But I know that it's possible, because if you are developing normal VS Code browser extension for the VS Code.dev,
Yeah,
it works.
it
Like
works, yeah.
then authenticate API requests without mediator command. This is quite hardcore. We are using the mediator command that effectively blocks having third-party extensions, because any extension could just invoke the fetch from API command and make whatever destructive operations on your GitLab account. because it has a full API access to your user. So we need to figure out whether we will create instance-wide trusted OAuth app, whether we will somehow introduce a way how to limit the use of mediator commands to only our extensions, or what's going to happen there. I think this is pretty, like if I was giving this weight, I would give it like weight 13. This could be, a
This
little
is pretty
project
complex.
on its own. Yes.
I don't know whether, because it's a bit different. It's not like only OAuth, like because when you're doing OAuth app, for example, you can give it access to all APIs, right? You could say read API or all APIs or whatever. That's not really helping us. I almost think like when someone develops extension which they're targeting the WebIDE for, in the package JSON, they almost need to give us like more granular questions, right? More granular permissions. And then when we load in that extension, we can read that package JSON and say, hey, they're trying to modify MRs and they're trying to do issues or whatever. And so then, we can restrict it that way.
There is already a like a native VS Code mechanism for the they've got authentication API where you can ask for, like any extension can ask for a session from a provider, which we like is a string, but it would be a key that we select, like GitLab, for example.
Yeah.
And then they define the scopes, and it shows you, like the VS Code shows you, like this extension would like to use your GitLab provider with these scopes. Are you okay with that? And then if yes, then the provider will give it a session. So that is already handled. But the main issue with this is that the WebIDE lives in this. The WebIDE lives in. This is my image of that. This gray box is WebIDE, and it's sandboxed in, and then it's inside of iframe.
Oh,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
when you are doing the redirects for the Pixie allowed flow, you can't intercept the redirect because you won't see the URL. We would have to create some kind of, not mediator command, like with this window post message method that would kind of give us what are the parameters from the URL, and it would somehow pass it down to the VS Code instance so it can finish the authentication flow. Like this is quite complex, but I was writing somewhere, not here, but somewhere I was writing like, we didn't introduce this. This is existing WebIDE in issue, but we made it worse by opening the API requests for anything. Before that, it was a handful of API requests that each one of them had a separate mediator command. And we came in and we said any extension can do anything. Yeah. So that, sorry, I'm over time. If you are, do you have another 5 minutes? So I finished walking through these. Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Okay. So this is turning to be quite important and quite controversial. It's injecting settings and feature flags into the WebIDE workflow. Today I spent some time polishing the issue, but long story short, for WebIDE, I said that we need to design a mindset, not just a solution, but a mindset how we are going to think about this, because users will still have options like workbench status bar visible, right? Yeah. And somebody might want to not have a status bar visible. They just want to have more extra space in the WebIDE, so they disable it. And that's something that absolutely belongs to settings JSON.
Yeah,
but then you would have this, where are some references? But then you will have some features like we now have the code suggestions that you want to control from the GitLab interface and not from these settings. You don't want users to be able to override it. And so, like, how are we going to even do that? And how are we going to reconcile the fact that the desktop version has only settings JSON and users can do whatever there? Like if the shared logic, if they want to enable some feature, they will enable it regardless of what their VS Code instance allows. So my thinking about the golden scenario would be that API is going to drive these. So when you connect your extension to your instance, regardless of whether it's a WebIDE extension or whether it's a desktop extension, the API will tell them, no, you can't use this feature, and that's it.
So
But
you're thinking of a settings API for the user, which will have flags, settings, and stuff returned, and you will make this call, right?
yeah, but the settings, it's going to be different from setting sync, just to clarify that, because the
I mean,
settings,
user options, let's say, or
yeah,
user.
yeah, yeah, something like that, something like enabled features or whatever. That would be one option. Another option is that we, anyway, for any feature, we need to use the API. So we could just say, we'll make a first call to that API, and if it fails, we disable the feature, which is not that great user experience compared to knowing upfront that the feature is not supported at all. But we don't have anything like that in API yet. We can't even get from API whether you have a premium or ultimate or our
Yeah,
free
that's
subscription.
right. That's a
So
pretty basic thing, but yeah, they don't have it.
so I don't know how. That's why I'm saying it might be the golden scenario. For now, we might be stuck with reading the config, as Shikar was suggesting, that we just will create some abstraction above the client-only config, and that's what we will read. But
Why don't we create a separate API, like user WebIDE API, which gives any options we built in GitLab.com, which are then available on the
and when you are
API.
saying API, you mean like a REST or what is it, GraphQL API built
Yeah,
into a
totally. So at the beginning of a WebID session, we connect to
yeah.
a
Yeah,
page.
that would be great. Yeah, I would love that.
Let's say you have a default of feature flag settings and so on. We
Yeah,
get a list of them, and then on the GitLab code base, we evolve that. It's like, this push to front end feature flag thing, which works everywhere because you have controllers which push to
yeah,
front end in GitLab. We can't do that. So we shall have an API for WebID,
yeah.
VS, or Workflow, or other IDs where they will get the breakdown of all settings or feature flags or user choices preferences.
100%. That's what would be the ideal scenario, in my opinion.
It also helps with, Stan was discussing an issue like someone wants to have a status icon on whether you have that setting enabled or third party enabled. Now, we could use that API to do that, to give status feedback,
Yeah,
icon feedback to the user that they have to enable, disable. Yeah.
I totally agree. That would be fantastic if it's like something that we could do in some. It seems like this is now quite important since like Paul had reservations to how we went with what I called option one, where now people are able to actually override this in their web IDE and like try to have suggestions, even though it's going to fail, but they can try. And so I don't know whether this is time sensitive or whether we can take our time and design something really nice. But
Let me give you,
what you described, Alper, sounds like the
yeah, let
best
me give you
solution
another
to me.
example. So, GitLab, in GitLab, we use Flipper feature flags, which are Ruby feature flags in the backend. But GitLab has a category feature flags, which we offer to customers, which are based on Unleash feature flags. Unleash is
Yeah.
project based and it has an API. So whenever you check feature.enabled, it makes an API call for that particular single feature flag. And then you also mention if it's default on or off. And then, but we don't use Unleash for GitLab development. And also for WebID, it will be overkill to, make hundreds or dozens of separate calls to Unleash and configure it in GitLab or GitLab project. That's why we may just come up with an IDE-based user option settings API endpoint,
Yeah.
which, yeah, which
That
can, yeah.
sounds good. Also, dogfooding Unleash wouldn't be too bad. Like if we can,
Yeah, that's true.
if I'm sure that Unleash will support like batching the requests. That if you want to know about 10 features, you don't have to make 10 API calls, but you can make one where it tells you. So that
Customers, we have the customers portal application for billing purposes. They use Unleash now. They use the GitLab customers project configured with settings there. where you can, enable, disable in the GitLab project UI, but that's only for feature flagging. Why I think Alnish will not be enough is because we need more than, I think, feature flagging.
Right, yeah, because the code suggestions is user setting or as well as administrator setting. That makes sense.
Also the PMs have a focus on enterprise grade, which for them means that they want to have the group admins enable, disable, and other stuff for their users.
Yeah.
So those are hard to propagate.
True. Makes sense. So now unleash our own API would be ideal.
Yeah.
And then the last bit, and it's not really that important like for us in particular, but I'm going to be documenting what we've done with the code suggestions. So when other teams like explain my code or whatever other new feature will be implemented, they can follow documentation and implement their own feature. What I'm working on at the moment is I'm trying to separate, again, I created like draft MR, but now I'm going to do it for real, separate the shared logic from desktop from browser. So when people start contributing shared features, they only do it in a shared folder or common folder and not just all over the place, as we did it with code suggestions. It's already visible that with the platform and everything, we didn't have like a place to put those things, so they are all over the place. And I'm polishing that. And that's it. That's what I wanted to discuss today.
That's really cool. I think we need to figure out who's going to work on what as well. But once you finish polishing the issues up, right? Then you can do that.
Yeah, well, if you had something from that you would be interested on working on, just raise your hand and then like assign it to yourself.
Okay, I will try to have a look at the particular feature settings things.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Which can also have GitLab backend Ruby. That could be,
That would be good for your skill set.
I have to also, coordinate with a lot of PMs there. Everyone is working on AI and they all have different ideas on how to have settings.
Yeah. This is, as I said, it's like the mindset of it is a little bit mind bending, where you need to distinguish between like feature flags, then GitLab settings that might be administrator settings as well, and then user settings like I want to see a status bar or not. That's just like explaining it to someone who hasn't spent that much time in extension development is not going to be easy.
Yeah, and Marcel, the UX, he has a point there that our group admin settings work this way. Like, let's say we all are more or less we have more than 23 root level namespaces groups. If one of them disables those suggestions, you don't get it. Now, how will you know which one disabled it? There's no way to know it. So at some point, he was asking for an API to really check, give me all my groups, and
give me the name of the person that I should talk to. Yeah,
exactly.
That would be
At some point, we can have that because I think due to the product decision, that really has become very important. He says, I have 42 groups. Now, how should I know which one disabled it?
Yeah,
I've had that.
Maybe the product decision is not right. I don't know, but it's just okay.
All right. Thank you so much for the sync.
Thank you.
And I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.